Let's get a read on how China really comes through all of this. The consensus seems to be, if you want to know how the whole thing went and how it fared, look at the markets, but look more specifically at the Asian markets. Look really specifically at the Chinese markets. Of course, anything that looks favorable to ease tensions in North Korea, client state, if you will, looks good for the Hang Seng Index, and the Singapore Exchange, the Nikkei, as I said. You could go to that and look at Beijing and what have you. So it could all cascade that way. We'll be monitoring those markets, by the way, in real time as these talks ensue tonight, beginning, of course, with my friend Lou Dobbs at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, and we pick up the baton at 9 p.m. until whenever. But the read on all of that right now with Brookings Institution Director of Foreign Policy Research, Michael O'Hanlon, Heritage Foundation, Asian Studies, Senior Fellow, Dean Cheng. Dean, what do you make of that and how China fits into all of this? Anything that hints at just better relations, period, forget whether you got a solid deal right at the outset, all to China's advantage. Do you buy that?
Well, the Chinese want stability on the Korean Peninsula. A war is bad, but also a collapse of North Korea is bad, because that means millions of refugees streaming into China. So they want that. At the same time, they're also looking to take advantage of any openings that occur, especially if they can drive a wedge between the United States and South Korea.
Michael, how much, leaving the G7 and the war words that just accelerated, is that affecting the tone of this summit, or whether it was by design meant to, coming from the White House, send the Chinese, the North Koreans a message, look how we deal and talk with our friends. Imagine what we'll do to you. What do you make of it all?
Well, perhaps it could be interpreted that way in retrospect. I don't really have the sense that's what President Trump meant by it when he first started tweeting. I think we were just hearing his frustration. This is a president who doesn't hold back, and whether you're his supporter or his critic or a little bit of both.
Frustration over what? I mean, frustration over what? I mean, Justin Trudeau didn't say anything in those comments that he hadn't said publicly before. So am I missing something?
I don't think you're missing anything, but it doesn't mean that President Trump wasn't frustrated. I mean, I'm not here to justify what he did, but clearly he got angry. And he got angry about a set of relationships that he thinks, as he said in his campaign, is largely at the expense of the United States in economic terms. I don't necessarily agree with him on that point, but that's what he thinks. He said it many times. And obviously he felt that some of the words that Prime Minister Trudeau used, which I found pretty mild, were nonetheless somehow inflammatory. And then he escalated. So I think that's what we saw. I don't see it as trying to serve a particular purpose in advance. Maybe there is a way to do what you said and to remind the North Koreans that, you know, this guy's capable of getting upset, just as 2 weeks ago he was going to cancel the summit. But I think that was more of an interpretation after the fact as opposed to a conscious design.
Yeah, I should stress, Michael, that I didn't even believe my own question. So I should just say, I'm just trying to justify what seemed like an impulsive response. And Dean, I'm wondering from your vantage point, if to Michael's astute observation, something set the president off and had him do a 180, it doesn't then presumably take much for something to set him off and doing a 180. And if I'm the North Korean leader or any of his confidants, I got to tiptoe carefully, right?
Well, I think that the president's willingness to just cancel the summit, which he clearly was prepared to do, is a message to the North Koreans. You have a president who is literally prepared to get up and walk away from the table. If that's what you're prepared, you know, that should be a factor in North Korea's negotiating stance with the United States. And by the way, that's probably also a message for the Chinese as they look ahead towards tariff negotiations and the like.
But I think if you say anything in politics or any slight zing here, Michael, then all bets are off. And it could take something as innocuous as that to have this whole thing unravel. What do you think?
Well, I think you're right to be concerned. However, even though I'm not an overall supporter of President Trump, I actually think his approach towards North Korea is not all crazy, not all bad, because he alternates between the warmth, which suggests he's willing to have a new relationship if things fall into place, but also the bluntness and the willingness to show a bit of an emotional reaction, as Dean just said and as you just said. And I think that actually may not be a bad way to play this kind of situation, rather than just trying to be straight and only let the North Koreans deviate emotionally from one one extreme to the other. And so keeping them guessing a little bit, as long as we stay self-disciplined in our own minds, in our own ultimate behavior, I think it may not be such a bad tactic.
We keep talking. I was talking about a prior State Department official before, Dean, about this idea that pressure for limited time here. It's not as if it's a 2-week Camp David Accord or sort of almost a full week in Vienna with John F. Kennedy and Nikita Khrushchev. There's very little time here to make an impression or to get something done. Now, that could work to both sides' advantage. What do you think comes of it in this limited time?
I actually have very limited expectations. I think the important thing is that there are now going to be face-to-face negotiations by the leaders, but frankly, I don't expect a peace treaty or even necessarily a final denuclearization kind of agreement. But if they are prepared to have further meetings, if, you know, President Trump doesn't just get up and walk away, meaning that the North Koreans don't put silly ideas on the table and expect us to take them seriously, then I think that it will still have moved the ball forward at least a little bit. Not necessarily a first down, but at least part of the way there.
No, I would agree. Better to meet and at least come to no conclusion, not to meet at all and just leave the worst instincts to bear. But having said all of that, Michael, I mean, do you get a sense now that the markets are telling us something? They've been up through the worries about the G7 and the fighting back and forth, up even with some of the cynical sort of reads on what might come out of these talks with North Korea. What do they see that maybe some nervous prognosticators do not?
You know, we have these debates about how smart are the markets, sort of the collective emerging consciousness of investors around the world. I think sometimes that can be true and sometimes it's not. I don't think the markets are all that smart on this one because we're trying to read the future with two very unpredictable individuals and a very, very unpredictable North Korea. I was struck when Secretary Pompeo said at the top of your news show, the ultimate objective of our negotiation remains complete, verifiable, irreversible disarmament. Doesn't have to be the first objective. And I think that was an important sign of potential flexibility, which could lead to the kind of interim deal that I believe is the more realistic objective here.
All right. Gentlemen, I want to thank you both. We'll get a first hint of this as the night ensues, the day ensues. Remember, they're about 12 hours ahead of us here.